Hollywood has seen every kind of chaos, except this. One night on the Sunset Strip, Mötley Crüe went so far off the rails that club owners, police, and even their own industry quietly agreed. The band had to be shut out. This wasn't a rumor, and it wasn't an exaggeration. It was the night Hollywood finally said, enough. The night everything boiled over. The breaking point came on a night that started like any other Mötley Crüe show, packed wall to wall, bodies pressed against the stage, and an energy that felt more like an earthquake than a concert. The Strip had seen wild shows before, but this one had a different edge to it. Fans weren't just excited, they were restless, fueled by hours of drinking, heat, and the band's reputation for turning every venue into a war zone. Inside the club, the atmosphere felt electric and unstable at the same time. When the band hit their first chords, the room erupted. People were climbing on tables, pushing toward the stage, knocking over anything in their way. Security was already overwhelmed before the first song ended. Staff members later said they felt the crowd shift from rowdy to dangerous in minutes. Backstage, tensions were building long before the music stopped. Too many people had been allowed in. Friends of friends, hangers-on, strangers who had slipped in with the crew. Alcohol and egos mixed badly, and arguments started over the smallest things. Equipment space, sound checks, even who had access to the dressing room. One push led to another, and suddenly a full-blown fight broke out behind the curtain, loud enough for people in the hallway to hear. Meanwhile, out front, the club was reaching a breaking point. Sweat-drenched fans were pushing against the doors, forcing bouncers to physically block the exits to prevent a stampede. Someone smashed a glass against a wall. Another person climbed onto a speaker and jumped into the crowd, knocking people down. Every few minutes, staff had to pull someone out who had passed out, been punched, or simply collapsed from exhaustion. Then the situation spilled outside. The line of people trying to get in grew impatient. Fights erupted on the sidewalk, and traffic on Sunset stopped when dozens of fans charged across the street to catch a glimpse of the chaos. Horns blared, drivers shouted, and a parked car was dented when fans were shoved onto it. By the time the police arrived, summoned by terrified neighbors and overwhelmed security, they found a club on the verge of total collapse. Officers tried to separate the crowds, but the chaos was too wide. Some claimed they threatened to shut the venue down permanently if this happened again. Inside, the owner had reached his limit. Equipment was destroyed, walls were damaged, and the dressing room looked like a storm had torn through it. That night, he told Mötley Crüe's camp they were finished. No more shows, no more excuses, no more chances. What he didn't know was that other club owners were about to follow his lead. How Mötley Crüe became the Strip's most dangerous attraction. Before the chaos reached a boiling point, Mötley Crüe were the lifeblood of the Sunset Strip. In the early 80s, every promoter from the Roxy to the Troubadour wanted them on their stage. They packed venues faster than any band in the scene, pulling in crowds that wrapped around entire blocks. Club owners loved the revenue, and fans treated each show like a once-in-a-lifetime event. But as their fame grew, so did the intensity and the danger. It started small: broken chairs, a cracked mirror, a dressing room sink ripped out of the wall. Promoters shrugged it off as rock and roll damage. But the band's shows turned wilder with each passing month. Fans weren't just partying, they were out of control. Security teams often doubled on crew nights because fights were guaranteed. One former bouncer later said, "You didn't work a Mötley show to keep people safe. You worked it to survive." The band themselves fed off the chaos. Nikki Sixx had a habit of lighting things on fire: drum kits, signs, props. Tommy Lee joked years later that they caused more police reports than rehearsals. Crowds threw bottles, ripped down posters, and stormed stages. On more than one occasion, officers had to stand by the exit just in case things got out of hand. Word spread quickly among club staff. A Mötley Crüe booking didn't just mean a packed night, it meant bracing for destruction. Insurance claims skyrocketed. Repairs became routine. One venue manager said he had to repaint walls after nearly every Crue show because fans smeared makeup, beer, and who knows what else all over them. At first, the Strip tolerated it. The band was too profitable to deny. But after Vince Neil's rising fame and the rapid growth of LA's glam rock scene, competition intensified. Other bands drew the same crowds without leaving thousands of dollars in damage behind. Promoters started asking themselves whether Mötley Crüe was worth the risk anymore. Still, the recklessness didn't slow down. Their reputation snowballed. Fans expected chaos, the band delivered chaos, and the Strip braced itself every time their name hit the schedule. Then came the night that proved Hollywood was done tolerating them. The night when the Strip, without saying a word, finally sided with self-preservation. The incident that finally broke Hollywood's patience. The night everything collapsed backstage has become one of the Strip's most whispered legends. People who were there describe it differently, but every version agrees on one thing. The chaos wasn't just out of control, it was dangerous. The cracks in Mötley Crüe's relationship with Hollywood had been forming for years, but this was the moment the Strip finally snapped. It started when too many people slipped past the backstage security list. Mötley's shows always attracted a swarm of friends, fans, roadies, and strangers who claimed to know the band. But that night, it looked like half the bar had forced its way in. People were drinking straight from bottles, slamming doors, arguing over who had access, and crowding equipment meant to stay untouched. The tension was already thick when one loud argument between two hangers-on erupted into shoving. That shoving turned into fists, and soon bodies crashed into amps and cables worth thousands. Several eyewitnesses claim a lighting rack came loose during the chaos, narrowly missing a tech who dove out of the way at the last second. Others remember drum hardware being knocked over, cases smashed, and someone throwing a mic stand across the room in anger. Whether a band member was directly involved depends on who you ask. Some swear they saw one jump in to break things up. Others insist the crew pulled everyone away. But the damage was undeniable. Meanwhile, the mayhem spilled into the hall. Security tried dragging people out, but the narrow backstage corridors turned the whole scene into a bottleneck of yelling, cursing, and stumbling bodies. Someone slipped and cracked a wall panel. Someone else threw a punch at a security guard. The noise was so loud that the venue owner sprinted backstage thinking a fire had broken out. At the same time, the front of the venue had exploded into its own crisis. Fans heard the commotion and rushed toward the rear exit. People banged on the locked door, convinced they were about to witness something catastrophic. When police arrived, responding to multiple calls from neighbors and staff, they were met with a screaming crowd, broken glass outside, and a venue that looked like it was seconds away from being overrun. Inside, the officers assessed the damage, the injuries, the out-of-control fans, and the wrecked backstage area. One officer, according to several accounts, said the venue needed to get its act together or lose its license. The message wasn't aimed at the band directly, but everyone understood it perfectly. That same night, the club owner made a quiet phone call to two other venue managers on the Strip. What he said wasn't recorded, but each of those clubs suddenly became unavailable to Mötley Crüe in the weeks that followed. Hollywood wasn't waiting for a formal meeting. The decision had already been made. Hollywood turns its back. In the days following the incident, the shift on the Sunset Strip was quiet but unmistakable. Mötley Crüe's manager began calling around to lock in their next shows, but something felt off. Venues that once begged for the band suddenly claimed they were fully booked for months. Others wouldn't return calls at all. One promoter who had worked with them since their earliest days finally picked up and said he didn't want the heat anymore. No explanation, no apologies, just hesitation and fear. Word traveled quickly among club owners. The damage bills from the previous show were staggering, and rumors of police pressure made everyone nervous. Even though no official ban existed, everyone understood the unspoken truth. Booking Mötley Crüe was now a risk that could cost a venue its license, its insurance, or its reputation. The Strip wasn't built on safety, but it was built on survival, and suddenly the band looked like a threat to both. Another issue hovered in the background. The city was changing. More eyes were on Hollywood nightlife. Local officials were cracking down on overcrowding and violence, and the media was circling after several high-profile rock incidents. Clubs wanted clean headlines, not chaos, and nothing symbolized chaos more loudly than Mötley Crüe. Even their label sensed the tension. Insiders later admitted that executives quietly encouraged the band to focus on touring elsewhere while letting things cool off in LA. Translation: Stay away until promoters stop panicking. To fans, it looked like the band was simply touring more aggressively, but behind the scenes, they had lost access to the very heart of their identity, the strip where they were born. The wildest band on Sunset Boulevard had become the band Sunset Boulevard no longer wanted. But this setback wasn't the biggest storm headed their way. A tragedy beyond the stage would soon turn public opinion even further against them, and Hollywood would distance itself like never before. The Razzle tragedy and growing public pressure. If the backstage explosion pushed Hollywood to the edge, the tragedy that followed shoved the entire industry into a moral crisis. On December 8, 1984, Vince Neil's drunk driving crash took the life of Nicholas Razzle Dingley, the drummer for Hanoi Rocks. The other passengers were badly injured. News of the accident spread fast, and overnight, Mötley Crüe went from notorious rock stars to the center of a national outcry. Hollywood wasn't just shaken, it was scared. For years, the band's recklessness had been treated as part of their charm, a wild spectacle that sold tickets. But now, people were asking real questions about responsibility and consequences. The press framed the tragedy as proof of a dangerous culture spiraling out of control. Headlines didn't distinguish between the band, their fans, or the entire Sunset Strip scene. To the outside world, it all blurred together, and suddenly the Strip looked like a place where lives were being lost. Clubs felt the pressure immediately. Reporters showed up outside venues asking if they regretted booking the band. Parent groups demanded crackdowns on rock shows. Insurance providers threatened to raise premiums or drop coverage entirely for businesses connected to high-risk performers. And behind closed doors, venue owners who had already been shaken by the previous incident now had a socially acceptable reason to walk away. They didn't need to hide behind excuses. Public opinion had spoken for them. Even though Vince Neil served his sentence and expressed deep remorse, the stigma would follow the band for years. Hollywood promoters weren't just afraid of damage anymore. They were afraid of headlines. Booking Mötley Crüe suddenly meant inviting controversy, protests, or worse, another tragedy. For the Strip, this sealed the band's unofficial exile. And just when it seemed things couldn't get any worse for the group, another near-death moment from within the band would push the industry to its breaking point all over again. Nikki Sixx's overdose and industry panic. Just when the band was trying to recover from the fallout of Vince Neil's crash, another event shook Hollywood to its core, this time from within the band itself. On December 23, 1987, Nikki Sixx suffered a near-fatal heroin overdose that made headlines worldwide. Paramedics famously injected him with 2 shots of adrenaline to restart his heart, a moment that became legend in rock history. For the fans, it added to the band's mythology. But for Hollywood, it was a nightmare. Promoters and venue owners saw the overdose not as a tragic accident, but as a warning sign that Mötley Crüe was spiraling beyond control. Many of them had already been reluctant to book the band because of property damage, crowds, and legal issues. Now they feared something even worse, a death inside their venue. Insiders later said that insurance companies began reviewing policies after Sixx's overdose, classifying bands involved in high-risk behavior as liabilities. Even without naming Mötley Crüe directly, everyone knew who the industry meant. Label executives also went into panic mode. Behind the scenes, they told promoters to avoid hosting the band until stability returned. A polite way of saying, don't take a chance on them. Some promoters admitted years later that they felt pressured to distance themselves, not just for business reasons, but for their own peace of mind. No one wanted a life-or-death situation unfolding backstage, especially after all the headlines that had already surrounded the group. Fans, meanwhile, were concerned, but also obsessed. The overdose created a kind of dark fascination, pulling crowds toward the band even more. Ironically, that only scared Hollywood further. High demand meant bigger crowds, bigger risks, and bigger potential disasters. The Strip couldn't handle that kind of volatility anymore. As the band battled its own demons, Hollywood continued to pull away. For a city built on scandal, this had crossed the line. Mötley Crüe wasn't just unpredictable. They were seen as a threat to the entire ecosystem that kept the Strip alive. But the story wasn't over. Just when it looked like Hollywood would leave the band behind for good, something unexpected happened. and the comeback no one predicted began. The comeback Hollywood never saw coming. By the late 80s, Mötley Crüe felt the weight of the chaos they'd created. They weren't kids anymore, and the industry had begun to treat them less like rising stars and more like a volatile storm that could hit at any moment. The strip that once embraced them now kept its distance. Yet somehow, this exile became the turning point that would reshape their future. The band's sobriety efforts marked the first shift. Nikki Sixx, shaken by his own near-death experience, became the loudest voice pushing for change. His relapse, recovery, and eventual commitment to sobriety inspired the rest of the group to confront their own habits. Management tightened control, touring schedules were adjusted, rules were put in place that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. For the first time, the band wasn't fighting the system, they were working to survive it. As the band stabilized, Hollywood slowly began to reconsider. The same promoters who once avoided their calls watched crowds pack arenas across the country. The demand hadn't faded, it had grown stronger. Fans weren't just loyal, they were hungry for the band's return to the city that shaped them. And money, as always, talked louder than fear. Clubs that once banned them started sending messages through booking agents. Maybe we can work something out. The conditions were strict: higher security, larger deposits, tighter time limits. But the doors were cracking open. Even venues that vowed never to host them again admitted privately that the band had matured. The chaos wasn't gone, but it no longer felt uncontrollable. By the early 90s, Mötley Crüe had reclaimed their position as one of Hollywood's defining acts. What began as a quiet, unspoken exile ended with a triumphant return, proving that even when the strip turned its back, the band's legacy was too powerful to erase. The legend of the night they were banned lived on, not because of a formal decree, but because it symbolized how far the band pushed the boundaries of fame, excess, and survival. And to this day, that story remains one of rock's most infamous chapters. Hollywood tried to shut Mötley Crüe out, but all it did was make their legend louder. The strip couldn't control them, the industry couldn't contain them, and that's exactly why their story still hits harder than ever. If you want more untold moments from rock's wildest era, hit subscribe, drop a comment, and tell me which behind-the-scenes story you want next. This is Backstage Melody, where the truth behind the music never dies.